Today, I'm going to be sharing with you the next installment in my 2022 recap series of all the films that I watched in February. I had a few guidelines for films that would make the list this year. I wanted the films that I watched this year to be new watches, so things that I hadn't seen before, and I wanted to watch films in full with no distractions. So that means watching the film in its entirety from start to finish, not being distracted by whatever else was on my computer or phone or TV, and not just watching certain segments of a film or just the beginning or just the ending. I do end up having a lot of rewatches on my list throughout the months, but I do stick to these rules for the most part throughout this year. So, without further ado, let's get started with recapping February's watches. The first movie I watched in February was The King of Staten Island, which I guess is like a semi fictionalized retelling of Pete Davidson's life. Both the character in the movie and Pete Davidson are young 20 somethings living in Staten Island with their mum, grieving the loss of their dad who died in 9/11, and are both just generally dealing with family issues and issues of growing up. Overall, I thought this was a really solid comedy. It had some great jokes and moments, but was also really nicely balanced with moments of drama. The acting was really good. Pete Davidson, who I had not seen in an acting role, only as a comedian, actually did a really good job with this, but I assume that he did a good job because it's his story, so he knows how to play it just right. But overall, this is a really good movie, a nice kind of easy mid-tier comedy that anyone could get into. The next movie I watched was Frances Ha, which is kind of similar to The King of Staten Island in that it's, another installment in the 20-something coming of age slacker film, but it's a completely different vibe. The film follows a young woman named Frances who is living in New York and is just kind of doing her best to keep her head above water in her job and following her career and ambitions, also trying to manage her friendships and find a place to live. All very common, typical things that 20 somethings go through. Even though for the majority of the film, Frances is, on the verge of homelessness, losing work, losing friends, and her life is just a mess. The film is just so light and charming and funny, and it never kind of stays in one place for too long or takes itself too seriously or gets too emotional. It's just a really realistic look at kind of taking the L and keeping it moving. She has all these things happen to her, but she has such a charming, pleasant attitude. And even though she's challenged by a lot of things, she kind of just goes with the flow and gets on with things and grows so much as a person because of it. I also really admired this movie because it says some really beautiful things about female friendships and having females in your life to support you and be there for you. So I really love this movie. I think it's excellent. The next film I watched was a documentary called Jiro Dreams of Sushi. It follows a 85-year-old sushi master and his sons who own and work at a very, very prestigious sushi restaurant. It has been awarded Michelin stars and is regarded by many as the best sushi restaurant in Tokyo. The documentary follows the father and the two sons, as they work at the restaurant, they explain the history of the restaurant and also what it has taken for them as a family and as individuals to get to the point of prestige and skill and recognition that they have now. When watching this documentary, I was completely in admiration and fascinated by the skill and determination of the sushi master and his two sons, how long they've spent working at their craft to be the best that they can be, and also the sacrifices that they've made in their personal lives and their family lives so that they could be focused on their work and be the best in their field. I think the movie says a lot about determination and work and sacrifice, and also shows a lot about the Japanese culture and the Japanese values behind those things. I was also really impressed by the documentary's pacing and structure, and also its cinematography, especially when they were preparing and plating and serving the sushi. It looked incredible. The next film I watched was Queen Sized. Not many people, I think, have heard of this movie, but it's a TV movie from 2008 starring Nikki Blonsky, who was the lead in the Hairspray remake. And it's a high school teen comedy drama movie about a young woman who runs for homecoming queen when she's nominated as a joke by her high school bullies. This movie for me is purely a nostalgia trip. I had this movie on DVD when I was younger and I used to watch it all the time. And it's one of those movies where you recognize that it's not really a good movie. The story is kind of flat, the acting is pretty basic, and overall it's just a bit of a nothing movie. But because you have that nostalgia tied to it, and it's also just good fun, and for some weird reason you enjoy it, you just like to keep watching it and rewatching it every now and then. The final movie I watched in February this year was Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down. This is the first Pedro Almodovar film that I've watched, and overall I think it was pretty good. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I thought it was a good film, and judging from what I know about his other movies, it's a pretty solid introduction to his filmography and the types of movies that he makes. The film is about a twisted relationship between a young actress who is kidnapped by a crazed stalker superfan of hers. He holds her hostage and ties her up, pardon the pun, in this apartment. And even though she tries to initially escape and challenge him and break free, as the movie progresses, they begin to fall in love and have their own little twisted romance. The one thing that I remember and admire from this movie was how bright and vibrant it looked. I mean, just look at this still right there. Look at how vibrant and deep those reds are. They look incredible, and the whole movie is like that. So that was one thing that I really liked about the film, was that it looked really good and it was really, really colorful. The story was okay. It was a little bit more kind of raunchier than I expected, but after going back and learning a little bit more about this director's kind of films he makes, I think that's a kind of characteristic of his movies. Overall, I think it was a pretty good introduction into Pedro Almodovar's films, and I look forward to checking out more of them. So that wraps up everything that I watched in February 2022. It was a short list, but there were some pretty good choices in there and a good mix of movies. As always, thank you so much for listening in. I hope that you continue to stay tuned with my recaps as I review my year in film, and also stay tuned for more award season coverage.